Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to the new edition of the ACLiSA Speaker Series that we are beginning with this new year. So happy New Year as well from ACLiSA. Uh, Good morning if you are in one part of the world, which is half of the team of ACLiSA is. Good morning, good evening if you are where I am in India, and good afternoon if you're somewhere in between. We are very excited to be joined today by a dear friend of ACLiSA's, Dr. Devika Rangachari, to give this very special talk, the inaugural talk of this year for the speaker series. And without further ado, I will introduce Devika and we can just get into her talk that we've all been looking forward to. So Dr. Devika Rangachari is an award-winning Indian writer whose Queen of Ice was on the White Raven list, won the Neve Young Adult Book Award, was shortlisted for the Bal Sahitya Puraskar, has been optioned for a film by Netflix, we're really waiting for that, and is part of the Penguin Classic series. Her other books include Queen of Water, Queen of Fire, Queen of Earth, which have all been on the Parag Honors list. The Train to Tanjore. She also writes narrative nonfiction for adults, which is based on her doctoral and postdoctoral research on gender in Indian history, including her more recent publication called The Mauryas. So, Devika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ritvika. And it's such an honor to take part in the speaker series. And thank you for enabling me to share my work. I'm not going to get into time and good morning and good evening and so on, because I'm just going to say thank you to everyone who's joined in to listen to me. I'm just going to, I have written a lot of books for different age groups, different genres, but I thought for this talk that I would focus on my Queen series, which is about remarkable Indian women who have been invisibilized or haven't got their due in one way or the other in the historical narrative. So, First, history. History is a subject that most people dread. It is whenever I have gone to do sessions in school related to history, there is always this look of distress and disinterest that comes on the students' faces. It's probably a factor of the way history is taught rather than the content of history itself. Um, uh, so. Uh, why did I decide to write about history for young adults, which is what I've done in my Queen series? Well, there's a very long history, and women and history are very problematic aspects. Women are usually seen as a largely undifferentiated group with no real rights, but with a lot of duties, who sit on the periphery of the real action, and whose status rises and falls as if they're sitting on a seesaw all through the past. Whereas it's the men who go out and do the actual things, the real things, like founding kingdoms and fighting battles and making laws and building structures and so on. And the women usually, not just in textbooks, but in also a lot, an alarming number of general histories, are treated as extremely trivial or irrelevant to the reconstruction of the past. So you'll probably have, a paragraph devoted to them entitled Status of Women or Role of Women, which is a highly problematic title in itself, where you'll be told about the dresses that women wore and the jewelry that they liked, giving the impression that all through the past, women used to get up every morning and obsess over what to wear, while the men were, as I said, busy getting on with the real things. Now, I'm a gender historian specifying in a period called the early medieval period, which is roughly the 7th or the 12th century CE. And when you look at the actual sources of history, such as inscriptions, texts, coins, buildings, and so on, you get an absolutely different picture, one in which women were hugely important and influential in all aspects of life, be it polity, society, economy, and religion. And so, if you're going to focus on a male centered view of the past, it is going to be lopsided and incomplete. Now, when I say that the writing of Indian history is gender blind or male centered. Uh, this is not to say that it's specific to India alone. It is ubiquitous. It is all over the world. Writing of history has always been male centered. And it's not just true of history, it's true of any discipline in the world. It could be science, medicine, music, dance, anything. And it will end up being androcentric. Anyway, to get back to uh, my subject. I used to do a lot of sessions in school related to my other books when I started off writing about, realistic stories about school and family and friendships and so on, and a couple of forays into history, but nothing very specific. Like I just write about what interested me. But I remember going to this particular school, a very prominent school in Delhi, and having this conversation with the students um, about women in history. And I asked them to name any women that they could remember from the past. And after naming the usual suspects, which are, Mother Teresa, Indira Gandhi, Jahanara, or so on, they ground to a halt. The earliest queen that they could remember was Razia Sultana, the 13th century. And I said, were there any women before that? And they didn't know. And then I said, okay, did women exist during the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan civilization? Whereupon the instinctive reply was no. So, of course, I told them to think about what they just said, and then they immediately looked sheepish and said, yeah, okay, of course, women would have existed, but why don't we know about them? Well, you don't know about them because you are not informed about them, because women are seen as completely irrelevant. If there are a couple of very prominent women figures that you can't ignore, they are included as a kind of token, but for the most part, they are invisibilized, to coin a word. And I also repeated this entire conversation in schools across the country. And in every single case, when I asked them about women, the existence of women in the Indus Valley civilization times, the answer was no. And then I thought, okay, I am a gender historian. I'm looking at women in the early medieval period. I'm reintegrating them into the historical narrative, where general histories are trying to get away with saying that they were not there, or they were very they hardly played a role. And I'm trying to put them back here. So it's a kind of responsibility for me as a writer, and with the knowledge that I have, to write history for young adults in a way that is engaging, which will not make them run away screaming that it's a textbook that they don't want to engage with, and also to convey to them a legitimate part of their past. And so I started with this book, Queen of Ice, which is there on the screen. Um, and I also had the extraordinary luck of having this absolutely wonderful publisher, editor, two to begin with, and then one who, Shayani Basu, who actually is responsible for the entire Queen series, and who actually coaxed me to write the first one and all the ones thereafter. So I owe the entire series to her, actually. So Queen of Ice is the story of, for those who have not read it, the story of Queen Didda of Kashmir, who ruled in the 10th, 11th century CE, 25 as informal ruler, 25 as formal ruler. But there are two ways in which she's viewed in historical narratives. One is that, yes, she ruled, but let's focus on the men who ruled before or after her, even if they ruled for just a couple of years, because men are intrinsically seen as more relevant to the reconstruction of the past. The other way of viewing her is with a lot of alarm. So there are a lot of adjectives such as notorious, dissolute, unbelievably arrogant, unbelievably ambitious, and so on and so forth, because she basically contravenes the stereotype. This is a woman who is unapologetic about her ambition. She's intelligent. She's shrewd. She's political strategist. She's able to read, the entire power situation and negotiate for herself. In a world of men, pushing the patriarchal boundaries and strictures aside. And so there is this chorus almost, where there is a lot of speculation on whether she was a good person. And this is usually the trope whenever a woman appears in history, a powerful woman. There is a lot of hysteria about whether she had morals, whether she was religious, whether she prayed, whether she actually went to, religion, whatever religion was. Did she go to temples? Did she go to, anywhere and pray? Did she do good works? This is never the way in which men are ever assessed in history. Men are always assessed by their ability to fight, to expand the kingdom's borders, but to solve power equations. There is never any speculation on whether a man is religious or whether a man is good. Here, Didda is basically not good in most people's eyes. She's not really a woman. A lot of them say, because woman cannot be so ambitious, nor can she be so competent at politics. But anyway, Didda's story basically revolves around two obstacles. One, she is daring to rule at a time when the rule of primogeniture prevails, which is that the throne always goes to the eldest male, the nearest male relative. And here she's a woman negotiating for herself within in that context. The second is that she was lame. She had a deformed foot. She could move on her own, and therefore she needed to be carried around from place to place. Despite that, she ruled. She was able to give Kashmir a period of peace and prosperity, a long period of peace and prosperity that it probably didn't see before or since. And I thought that it was important that this story be known. I'm thankful that it's done very well, it's reached a wide audience, and it is ultimately a tale of human survival, but it is also a tale of Didda's incredible resourcefulness, her courage, her intelligence, and a lot of other things besides. I should say here that the further back in time you go, the lesser your sources are. So for this period, you just have a text, the Raj Tarangini, which is a historical chronicle of the 12th century, which is actually the main source for Didda's presence. Um, and then you have a couple of inscriptions that she issued, a couple of coins, but they're not very well preserved. So, you have to do a lot of detective work here, trying to cover the gaps in as plausible a manner as possible. So, and this was a real challenge for me to write because I had about 1 million facts at my disposal since she formed a part of my doctoral research. And I had to somehow condense that into a readable format, while also remaining true to the facts. So it was a real challenge. My next book was in the Queen series was Queen of Earth. And Queen of Earth, yeah, Queen of Earth. And this is the story of coming from early medieval Odisha. This is about Queen Prithvi Mahadevi of 9th century Odisha, that's even earlier than Didda, who had an extraordinary tale of survival and resilience that almost matches Didda's. I'm hoping that all of you do get to read these books. I'm not going to tell you too many details, but just that she she was made to rule over a hostile kingdom by her father. Her father was a very powerful ruler, a Somavamshi ruler who conquered the neighboring Bhaumakara kingdom and then puts her on the throne to rule rather than her brother. So she has, again, not just the problem of dealing with a hostile male populace, but how does she maintain herself on the throne? Because there are some other male heirs who are equally there contending for it. And the manner in which she deals with this situation is very interesting. Her public documents, her inscriptions are a very shrewd embroidering of the truth and realities. You have to read the book to know what exactly she did in order to remain secure on the throne. Both the inscriptions that she issues actually records donations of land to a particular woman. So there's a story there as well. And again, there are barely any sources pertaining to her. It's mostly hostile sources. Records of the time saying, oh my God, there's a woman on the throne. And that hostility has carried over to modern renditions as well, because a lot of historians, and this is true of both male and female historians, um, look for a dynasty's downfall in a very particular place. They usually trace it to a woman on the scene. So if there is a woman on the scene, that means the dynasty is going to fall. Or if a woman is already on the scene, that means that's the end of the dynasty. So the Muhammad dynasty that she was ruling is supposed to have crashed and burnt after her women rulers. But anyway, that's besides the point. In the male-centered historical reconstruction, she's supposed to have ruined the power basis. She's supposed to have vitiated the atmosphere. But basically, here is another woman who is negotiating for herself in a patriarchal environment, trying to push the boundaries, trying to transgress a lot of the strictures and maintain herself on the throne, also redeem herself in her father's eyes for a lot of things she does, and also show that the trust that he's placed in her rather than in her brother is actually valid. So this is a very interesting book about survival again. And then I come to the third book in the series, which is Queen of Fire, which has a very interesting origin story in itself. This book is about, actually, I was contacted by a UK press called Pushkin Press. They have a series called True Adventures, where they basically focus on different women from around the world in different historical periods. And it's an adventure series. So, this is meant for middle graders who will then get to know about prominent women. And of course, it's a very laudable venture. But then they told me, we want a story on the Rani of Jhansi, Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. And I promptly said no, because I think everyone everywhere has read her story in a million different ways. And I said, this has been done to death. I'm not interested in this. There are a lot of other women I could talk about because there's so much information out there. And they said, no, we have specifically chosen this figure because we want the British school children to know about their colonial past, to know how the British actually treated India. This is something they're not taught. So through these books, they will be able to know this through this story. But you have to make it into a proper adventure story. So this book is actually, I don't normally write adventure, and this is one breathless adventure. She's always running, or she's riding a horse, or she's fighting, or she's learning to different skills, archery, whatever, and so on. And she's it's always breathless adventure. But then once this was published, I realized that there's a lot of potential in her story to actually have it as part of the Queen series, which is why I adapted it, added a lot of things in it, and brought it up to the level of a young adult read. Because when you think about it, so much is known about her that she's virtually buried under the facts. She's been raised to the level of a superwoman, like a goddess who can do no wrong, who is standing and fighting for her kingdom of Jhansi against the entire British Empire, and who apparently fights battles without any problems, and knows exactly, she doesn't set a foot wrong, she is infallible, she is absolutely some kind of a miraculous being. But when you actually think about it, this is a woman who is in her early 20s when she marries into, or even younger, when she marries into the kingdom of Jhansi. Her husband is interested in theatrics, doesn't rule, so she has to rule on his behalf. He dies just after they adopt a boy to take the place of their infant son who has died. So she has to form a bond with this child, Damodar, as well, who is wondering what he's doing in the palace when he already has a set of parents of his own. But then she needs to have that child as her heir because the British, through the doctrine of lapse, are looking to take over kingdoms that don't have natural born heir to the throne. So it lapses to the British. So this is the crux of her fight. She's fighting to keep Jhansi safe for Damodar, for her family. And if you think about it, she's obviously terribly worried. She's obviously scared. She's obviously second guessing a lot of her moves. There's no doubt about her courage. Of course, there's courage in plenty, but she can't just be, she is a human being with all the frailties of a human being. And therefore, I wanted to resurrect the woman behind the name, which is what I did in this book, where you get to know about her feelings. You also get to know a lot about whether she was able to form this bond with her child or not. And I've done this little exercise in schools where I say that, you know, there's a very popular image of the Rani of Jhansi's fighting in battle with her boy strapped to her, Damodar, this young child strapped to her back, and she's on this horse and she has a sword in her hand. And I said, what do you think about when you see this image? And a lot of them immediately say, irresponsible. She's taken a child to war. You know, the child is there on her back, whatever, or that she's very courageous. But then, you know, when I push them a little and I say, if you were her sitting on horseback with your child strapped around you, what would you think? And then when you bury deeper, you realize you unearth the levels which tell you the human feelings behind this, that she would be terrified. She wouldn't know whether her son would be cut down dead behind her at any moment. She has to win this battle, otherwise she's, you know, sacrificing her son as well. She doesn't have an option. He's not safe. She can't leave him behind. Therefore, she brings him into battle. She's probably worried that he'll fall off the horse because she's on a war horse. He's a small child. He's right up there. So there, you know, a whole chain of thoughts that can come into your head. But all this is instantly negated when you invoke her name like she's a goddess. Yes, of course, she's a goddess in many ways, but she's also a human goddess, if there is such a term that can be used. And we need to see that, before we see anything else. So in her case, I actually had the problem of too many sources, which is a problem that I definitely did not have with the others. Um, and so I come to Queen of Water, which is my latest book in the Queen series, which came out in August last year. And I was actually avoiding writing this book for a long time. I am a South Indian, a Tamilian, and my father has been telling me forever to write a book which somehow deals with my heritage. And since I've specialized in the history of the North and the East, I was not very confident of my ability to do it, but then I finally thought, why not? And also because Shiny, my publisher, said, just do it as a challenge, you know. So I had to do a lot of research. Here again, inscriptions are mostly the source that you use for the story of the woman who is Queen of Water. That's basically Kundavai of the Cholas. The Cholas are an incredibly powerful naval dynasty in the south, in the Tamil region, on the banks of the Kaveri. Now, Kundavai is known as again as a very devout person. Whenever her name pops up in history, and this is true of a lot of very prominent women in history, simply because religion was a socially sanctioned public activity available to women. And so therefore they build a lot of, religious structures and so on. Nobody, of course, sees the other side of it. If you build a religious structure under your name or you build a secular structure on your name, you're actually in your name, you are actually concretizing your power on the physical landscape, and you're ensuring that generations after you will never forget you. But of course, in the rush to claim that all prominent women are pious, you often lose sight of that. So Kundavai was actually neck deep in the murky politics of the South at that time, which was also, which is basically she was a kingmaker. The inscriptions show that she actually mentored and guided her brother into becoming one of the most powerful rulers of the Cholas. I don't know if I should mention his name here, or that'll be a spoiler. Uh, um, Maybe it will be a spoiler because everyone will know his name. So her brother Arulmuri is basically made to understand the nuances of power by her and put on the throne, and he goes on to become extremely powerful, extremely famous. And then she goes on to mentor Arulmuri's son, who then becomes the second most powerful ruler of the Cholas. So she takes an unusual decision about her life. She stays on in her, her brother's court. She makes sure that she's visible, she's around. She has to deal with in fact, murderous politics. There is an assassination that happens, and she has to negotiate for, her family in the midst of it all. And so she was so much more than what she is conveyed to be. And in fact, even if you don't engage with the inscriptions at all, but you visit the Brihadishvara temple in Tanjore, um, that structure is immediately telling you about her power, which is usually not something is noticed by a lot of the historians who deal with the reconstruction of our past, which is that um, her donations to the temple are actually carved alongside those of her brother, the king's, in the central shrine. The donations made by his other wives are on the outer pillars and the outer walls. So it's clearly showing that, this woman is extremely powerful, extremely influential in court, and her brother is giving her this honor of inscribing her donations right alongside his. Um, and so that's pretty much about my Queen series. These are all stories of women who have exercised a huge influence on the way history has unfolded in different parts of the country. Um, and I think it's extremely important that I know the dictates of the curriculum. You have to finish, a certain number of facts, conveying a certain number of facts in a certain number of words. But I think that if young adults, and these books are not just for young adults, anybody anywhere seeking to understand Indian history needs to understand that if you do not include women into your comprehension of the past, it will necessarily be a lopsided one. And so it's not always that you start, looking around for women in history and say, okay, what do I know about this woman or that woman? As I told you, sources are notoriously hard to come by the further back in time you go. But the very fact that you can pose this question, you can problematize the issue and ask, am I getting a complete picture here? Is there something here that I don't know about? Is enough of a start. I'll just speak very briefly about some other books on history that I have written. This book called 10 Indian Monarchs Whose Amazing Stories You May Not Know. These are unsung heroes for various reasons. A lot of very prominent and interesting personalities fall into the cracks of history and you don't really hear about them. So I have mentioned 5 women and 5 men in history who people should know about. Then there is The Train to Tanjore, which is for middle graders, which is based on my father's childhood and an incident that happened during the Quit India movement in 1942 in Tanjore, because different parts of India experienced the independence struggle differently. Tanjore's experience is very different from that of the North, for example. So this tells you a little bit about that. My latest book, The Mauryas, is technically meant for adults to read. It's accessible history, readable history, but it's also something that young adults who are interested in engaging with the past can easily read. Um, and this is basically the Mauryan tale told through the tales that surround them, because you can't actually separate the Mauryan sequence from the legends and the stories and the tales that abound. And it's also, I think, through all my books, my endeavors basically one of trying to show that despite history dealing with the dead, it's actually ironically very alive. It's alive, it's interesting, it's vibrant, and I think it's very important to engage with history, with particularly in the current climate of today, in order to know what is happening in your present and in order to move into the future. So I think I've said pretty much what I have to say about my work. So I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, we have a few comments in the chat. And while we wait for more questions, I'm going to actually start because I have a lot of questions. And I don't actually know where to begin because it's so much that you've talked about that I want to explore. But I'll maybe work backwards and start from the latest that you talked about, which is Queen of Water. And I am interested in the cover primarily because, and Shiny Bas was here in the audience, so maybe she'll also have an answer for this. But this book came out not too long after Ponniyin Selvan did. And in the films, Trisha Krishnan is a visibly fair woman, but the cover is very strongly for a darker skinned woman here. Was this intentional that you don't want to do that colorist erasure of women also that we see so much in Indian media?
Do you want me to answer it or Shiny to answer it? Because Shiny
You can
was.
begin. You can begin.
Okay. So I should say we've had a fabulous illustrator for the entire Queen series, Tejashri Ingawale, who has managed to nail every story beautifully through the covers. The first three books had featureless women because it also is kind of it's a metaphor for the fact that yeah, women are there, they're right there, they're hidden in plain sight. You don't, that they're blurred, but they are right there. So it seemed very powerful to just not have features and talk about their featureless history, so to speak. And then we decided to break with that with Queen of Water and add features. And by the way, I recently did a school session in Delhi where uh, I asked the students, I said, would you prefer the featureless kind or the features? They said, no, 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 go back to the featureless one. We don't want ones with proper eyes and nose and all that. So, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and Kundavai was in all probability dark. So there is really no point in showing her as milky white. I mean, yeah, Trisha is, yeah, maybe that's their um, the dictates of popular entertainment. You need to show a movie in any which way. And I should tell you should not believe most of what is shown on the screen, even if it's historical, because it's likely to be 99% fiction and 1% fact. I mean, I'm being generous about the 1%. It's probably 0.5% fact. Because in signing away the rights for Queen of Ice, I was told that we can change the story and we can do whatever we like with it. So, that's what we're going to do to make it watchable and engrossing. So the last role they'd written the script where they had added a female assassin or something, but I fail to understand where that would fit into the actual story. But great, I mean, at least if the story comes to the screen, it's fine. But I'm trying to say that yeah, everything that you see on the screen, um, and Ponniyin Selvan and so on is yeah, it's one director's view of how this person would have looked like. And also, before anybody asks this question, I've had a lot of people ask me, "Oh, but in Ponniyin Selvan, this happens. So you've actually gone against history." No, the author of Ponniyin Selvan, who wrote Ponniyin Selvan a long time ago, and I are faced with exactly the same amount of historical sources. You interpret the sources the way you want. So you decide to add characters or delete characters or color the characters or do whatever it is. But yeah, it's essentially people's view of what happened based on certain very important inscriptions that actually point to the events that took place then. I don't know if Shiny is still here or willing to speak about what Tejashri decided to do with Kundave, or have I answered it?
I think you've answered it. And we have a couple of questions coming in. But before I get to that, I have, since you mentioned interpretation of history, I have one question that I definitely will ask before I get to the audience questions, which is um, so Queen of Water, Queen of Earth, Queen of Ice, and Queen of Earth required a lot of interpretation on your part because your sources were so rare. But it was completely different from Queen of Fire, like you said. So the approach was different. The way you have actually written the narrative is also different. You've given dates in Queen of Fire, which is obviously missing in the other books. So did that require some level of mental reconfiguration for you as the author, because you've been writing the Queen series in one way and now you are doing it differently?
Yes, actually, Queen of Fire was very different from the others and kind of experimentation and form because the other queens are all written in first person to begin with, and sometimes through dual narratives. This was written in the third person. I've not really, it was a kind of a challenge, trying to write in the third person and trying to see whether I could actually project the story as powerfully or as effectively as I did the others. I I hope managed to do that. And it's also, yes, I think I prefer working with not too many sources at my disposal, because then it gives me the flexibility to try and interpret the history, a history within, of course, the dictates of accuracy, but it gives me that liberty. With Queen of Fire, I felt very circumscribed in a way because everything is known. The only thing that is not known is her as a person. So that was the vent for my imagination. Everything else was right there in the public domain. So there's very little reinterpretation that you can do. So it gives you less flexibility.
Okay, so I'll start with the first audience question. Lavanya Karthik, creator of Ninja Nani, asks, could you talk about your writing process and how you research each book?
Oh gosh, actually, Shiny should be answering this because I drive her mad most times. I well, I normally I'm normally given about 6 to 8 months for a book, or I ask for 6 to 8 months for a book, and I spend a lot of time in my head, thinking about the person that I'm going to write about, and and maybe looking up some details. But then a lot of fermenting goes on in my head. I don't actually start writing until maybe when I have maybe 2 months left, and that's when I start writing, because I have so far been able to write very fast. I don't do multiple drafts because I don't think I would be confident enough of to send anything that I write if I was going to be endlessly polishing it. So I just take a chance and do it once, do it again, and then just send it off. It's worked so far, and touch wood, I hope it keeps working. But yeah, that is my process. I can't actually sit every day and write some whatever 200 words, 1000 words is great practice for writers. I know that this is what a lot of my writer friends do, and it's absolutely brilliant because it hones your craft. But I basically have these wonderful sentences all crammed into my head. It just occurs to me, and I think, oh gosh, I'm going to start off like this, and I start off like that. But I think when you're actually sitting down, you have this deadline and there's this panic that you have to start. That's when your brain actually quickly starts working, and then you just go ahead with it. That's pretty much my process. I think a
May,
lot of time, the time that I spent is basically in thinking and researching. I don't actually start
may,
putting it down with a structure until very late.
may I comment on Devika's process as an observer, please?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
shy.
So usually it consists of a solid year of chocolate cake and potato in some form to persuade her to write. Then there is and recently she's gone off chocolate, so it's a bit problematic. Then it is many, many months of research. Then she says, I'm going to write. And after that, there is acute misery because she says, this is the last book, I cannot write anymore. And then after a few weeks of intensive mourning, a perfectly miraculous manuscript arrives. This is uniquely her process, for which I'm very grateful. But that is the invariable pattern.
Oh gosh, yeah, I've driven her mad, poor thing. She's very patient and she's very lovely, and she's one of the best editors and publishers I've ever known and had the fortune to work with.
Is this
So yeah.
hangover from your grad student days when you were writing your thesis? Because I find myself resonating deeply with that.
I'm more of a reader than a writer. I can only write if I'm like really acutely miserable, and I write it in this kind of daze, and I'm just hate the whole, like, I'm so jittery when I'm going through it. So I don't know. I mean, I recently read the memoir of a very famous writer who described the process exactly as I went. I'm not saying that I'm enjoy that kind of popularity and fame, but it felt so wonderful to know that somebody else also dreads the process when they are in it. Like, it's much nicer to walk around thinking you're going to write something and thinking up all the ways in which you're going to write it, rather than actually you know getting down into the whole thing and yeah, doing it.
I should move on to my next question, to the next question in the chat. Anusha Srivastav asks, you've begun the effort to rewrite portions of history. How much more needs to be done?
More than can be done in one lifetime. So I'll have to like resurrect myself repeatedly in order to do this. There is so much. I'm often asked, why don't you write about this person in world history and that person? But I don't think I mean, there's so much to write within Indian history, within that context itself. So many interesting people, not just royal women, non-royal women as well. There's so many, there's so many wonderful, fabulous women all through the past that we've just lost to this, gender blind narrative. So yeah,
And
many lifetimes.
speaking of amazing women in history to write about, Shefali asks, "Ma'am, if you didn't have the research limitations, who would be the female from history you would want to write about?"
So many people. I mean, I actually became interested in history because I became fascinated with Henry VIII. So I would love to write about all his wives. They've already been written about to death, but they're so interesting and so wonderful. And then there's Cleopatra, and then there's so many women, I mean, everywhere. And there's so many other women from Kashmir that about, and there are other women in the South. So everywhere, research limitations. I would probably then start somewhere in the Stone Age, but it's a bit intimidating to be looking at stone tools and trying to fashion a story out of that. I think I'm more comfortable in this, medieval period where there is some information, but not all. And so therefore you can be a psychologist, you can be a detective, you can be a writer, you can be whatever it is and do it. I think this is my period of choice. And I don't think I've even scratched the surface of what lies here to
Okay, so speaking of continuing with that
resurrect.
thought, I have a question now. It I think we are all aware that we are at the moment living in a period of deep religiously driven rewriting of history and an erasure of certain narratives, particularly the Muslim periods of India's history. Interestingly, what I noticed was that all the queens that you have so far written about are Hindu women. Do you have any plans in the future Queen series? And I really hope to God that there are more books in the Queen series. Do you have any plans to write about the Muslim queens of India, such as Razia Sultana?
Um, yes, I could. Uh, I would be interested in doing that. Requires a lot of research because, as I said, my period of specialization is the 7th to 12th. So roughly, it's kind of just about when the Sultanate is settling in, and so it's largely, in fact, there is some amount of speculation that Dida is actually also patronizing Buddhism. So it's not very clear because she built about 64 structures pertaining to different religions. Kundavai also, by the way, builds temples as well as religious structures for the Jains. So it is never very clear where the religious affiliations lie. So yes, of course. I mean, I would be happy to consider any interesting woman with potential who I think I can write about in that period as well.
Orpita Shaka has raised a hand. Orpita, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you for the lovely session. I have a question about, like, you talked about the royal woman and the non-royal women, right? You spoke about that there are so many non-royal women who have so much potential but is also overlooked by history and historians, and literature can be a very, very powerful tool in bringing them forward and into the narrative of everyday consciousness. So I was wondering, during your research and during your own writing and own research and your dissertation, um, have you come across any women from the Dalit community? And would you in future, if you have come across, that is, would you in future use uh, like use your kind of knowledge to potentially write a story that talks about the non-royal kind of women in history who are put on the margins because of caste politics in India.
Yeah, I mean, not Dalit in the modern sense that we would know it today, but I would urge all of you, if it is possible, for you to read an English translation of the Raj Tarangani, the 12th century Kashmiri text, which talks about a range of people from different communities, different castes, and lower caste. What do they do? And also, interestingly, women from this lower caste also see the throne as a legitimate quest. So, you have all that as well. So non-royal women also look at it. You have a range of women from different castes and communities in other areas in early medieval Bengal and so on. But a lot of research would be required, in order to project them properly, because, visibility is not representation. Just because I am talking about a Dalit woman or a story doesn't mean that I'm doing justice to it until I actually either have lived that role or I have immersed myself enough in that life to be able to write about it. So, yeah, I mean, the women that I've written about so far have been part of my doctoral and postdoctoral research that I spent years, with understanding and, looking at the sources, understanding their compulsions, their ways of life, and so on and so forth. So of course I could write, and maybe I will write about, these women that you're suggesting about. But yeah, it'll take a lot of
Research.
research. Yeah,
Absolutely. Thank
to
you.
do justice to their story. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, a lot of questions are coming in now. But first, Onrimadi has raised a hand, so I'll get to her first. Onadi, would you like to ask your question?
Or would we just take the other questions and then I'll come back later?
Okay, sure. Okay, so we have a question. If I want to write about a woman, but her historical data is not available, only her husband's details are available, what can I do? Her family is famous in Sri Lanka. I will not, I will butcher the name, so I'm not going to, my apologies, I'm not going to read it because I will definitely butcher the pronunciation.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you know for a fact that there are no sources? Because usually, any woman that you come across in the past, the usual excuse is no one knows anything about her. But when you do enough digging, there is always something that you can find. It might not be a direct source, it could be an indirect source, it could be a hostile source, it could be a probable source. You have to do enough digging around to establish the fact that there are no sources. Um, if everything is known about the husband, then the husband would obviously have some amount in his known history about this woman. Therefore, you derive the source from the husband's, you derive the information from the husband as a source. It is perfectly possible. But, you always have to be careful when you're writing historical fiction about how much fiction you're throwing into the mix and how much is fact. Because if there is very little fact, then you might as well not call it historical fiction. The word history implies accuracy, implies facts, implies sources. If you are being responsible and being true to what the dictates of the genre are. So you everything has to be sacrificed at the altar of fact. If you want the story to go in a particular way, but a fact comes up contravening everything, you will have to junk your original thought and go according to what the fact is trying to tell you.
Urvashi Nangia is following up from that. She's asking, what is the percentage like of fact and fiction?
So I would say in at least the 3 books of the Queen series, Queen of Ice, Queen of Earth, and Queen of Water, would be around 80 to 90% fact, and the remainder is fiction. Fiction will come in the way you depict, conversations, things that they do on a particular day, or their emotions or their reactions, because that is not documented. That is something you derive from a particular incident that occurs in the past, and you try to put yourself in the protagonist's shoes and understand how that person might have reacted to certain things. That is never documented, it's never set in stone.
Uh, Tanya Galeria is asking, since children's literature is often shaped by the translator's choices and ideological stance, how can translators ensure that the feminist reinterpretation of history in your works, or the Queen series specifically, is not diluted or altered during translation? Uh, uh, Tanya, could I ask you to clarify that a bit further? Because which language specifically are you asking about the translation? Since the Queen series is in English, is it translation to some to to which language?
To other Indian languages, I think so.
Okay, thank you so much.
See, I don't really know too much about translation. I think that's something that Chayani or another publisher can answer better than me. But I would say translation is an extremely tricky business. It requires a very fine hand and a deep understanding of both languages so that you're able to convey the nuances in as accurate a manner as possible. But something will always be lost in translation, as we know. But yeah, I would say not pandering to certain uh, cultural sensibilities and diluting the impact of the text so as to make it more readable. That I don't think would be a great idea.
Since we are on the topic of translation, before I get to Heidi's question, um, the historical artifacts that you are referring to, especially for something for Dida or for Prithvi Mahadevi, they are obviously not in English, but they have been translated to a language you are familiar with so many centuries later. So, how much skepticism comes in for you in when you negotiate with these artifacts and the interpretation of these artifacts, or or do you at any point personally translate from the artifacts through language?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because most of my sources are in Sanskrit. So I had this whole process where I studied Sanskrit. I also sat with my father, who's a Sanskritist, and then double checked what I thought of. And I'll just give you one example from the Raj Tarangani that talks about women in Kashmir's history, where actually the translator, Oral Stein, has translated a particularly important verse in the Raj Tarangani as by association with marriage, many wondrous changes were wrought in the polity. But when you go back to the original Sanskrit word, it is not marriage, it is association with women, just the word women. It could be anything. It could be an affair, it could be a whatever, a woman bequeathing a throne in a particular way or something. So it widens the scope of what you're dealing with. Marriage gives a very restrictive thing, then you're looking at which marriages were actually impacting the polity in a profound way. But if you use the word women, which is the original word, then it opens up a huge range of possibilities and completely changes your understanding of what the context was.
Okay, that is very interesting. Okay. So I'll take Heidi's question. She's asking, you write YA fiction. What is your favorite children's or YA author, including middle grade, to read? Okay, I want to know this too.
Oh, good Lord. Contemporary or,
Contemporary
ever?
or from, doesn't matter.
This is tough because I can spend a whole day just discussing this because I've just been reading all my life and I have a million authors whom I deeply admire and love to read. How can I even how do I even go around? Okay. If I'm looking at YA in the current Indian context, I could just name a few names that I love to read. With Shabnam Minwala, who writes wonderful YA, and then there's of course always Paro Anand, and then there is Andalib Wajid. There is Lavanya, who's attending right now, writes the most quirky, interesting tales and also illustrates them beautifully as well. So many people. I am really sorry I've given a very inadequate answer to a question that's always weighing on my mind because a lot of people do ask me who's your favorite writer and who's your, would you like to read? And there are just too many to list.
Okay. Onrimadi she had her hand up. So would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. So my question actually kind of follows on from Ritvika's last question. And, because you rewrite history, we're talking about facts and fictions, the percentage, and especially because you're working with women who have been treated with hostility, even in historical sources. So, you're also at a risk of encountering resistance from readers who see history as a fixed body of facts and, view such reimagining as kind of tinkering with the past. So I just wanted to know if you have faced this kind of hostility. I'm sure you have. We talk about your accolades and your awards, but I'm sure you would have faced such kind of hostility. And if you could just share some of those experiences and
Yes,
kind of respond to the charge that fiction is,
yeah,
fiction is
that's a very
overstepping its boundary.
That's very
Yeah, sorry.
interesting, Anuriman. I'm glad you asked that because I have faced this of the most ridiculous kind. I mean, how do I even begin to pinpoint it? Okay, it has gone from history, something that everyone seems entitled to have an opinion on, whether they have a background in history or they understand anything about it. I've had ridiculous conversations with a lot of people who say, no, this is actually how what happened. You don't know what you're talking about. And I would just like to put on record right away that if you're a historian, you actually go through rigorous training. You study and you learn how to interpret sources, you learn how to look for sources, you learn how to postulate a historical argument or contention. And we're not just hanging around with the buckets and spades and digging into the earth and uncovering artifacts. No, there's so much more to history than that. And so it infuriates me when that kind of thing happens. Also, when you deal with gender, that is also something which is somehow seems to be a very sacred, thing for a lot of people, which is no, women have a particular image which is largely pertains to the domestic sphere, not to the public sphere. So are you sure about this? And do you really do you think you have your facts right? It is also sometimes been seen as, why are you studying women? This is a soft option. Why don't you study real history, which is, economic history or other kinds of history? I've also come across, there are some historians who've actually looked at a coin and said, this is the metal and, from which it was cast. This is the denomination of the currency, but will completely ignore the fact that it's issued by a woman, which then raises a whole lot of other questions. And you see, however much you want to think about objective history, there will always be a historian coming between you and the fact. You might not have access to the fact. So you might never get to know that a woman issued that coin. So it depends on, what the historian is trying to tell you. We strive for objective history, although there is no such thing. You will, largely be guided by the historian's bias, whatever it is. But yeah, there have been all these kind of objections about history per se, and also equally ridiculous ones about, why should my 15-year-old read Queen of Ice because it has violence? In a world where you have no qualms about, opening the world of whatever media open to your child and then letting them deal with violence and savagery on a daily basis, to then quibble about some woman in history, which is actual fact. I cannot whitewash it. This actually happened. And then to talk about, oh my God, how are children going to handle this? I think adults routinely undermine and underestimate the intelligence and discernment of readers, young readers everywhere. The fact that they read argues for a certain amount of intelligence and perception. And I think that this endless censorship and this endless monitoring and this endless hysteria about, our children should not get to know the wrong history is absolutely ridiculous. Because if you're actually reading, say, about gender history, it will impact the way you view women in your current world. And God knows there's a lot to be done to remedy that. So if you're actually going to be told over and over again that women were irrelevant in the past, it's going to impact the way you view women around you today. So a very a rant in response to your question, but there was so much I wanted to say about this. Yeah.
I have a little curious thought. is how do you assign each queen to an element? So how is Dida ice and Kundavai water? And
That just came about with this wonderful accident. Ice because we were looking for titles, and then Ice because of Kashmir, but also Ice because she's, essentially a cold person. So therefore,
okay,
Ice, double meaning. Queen of Earth because Prithvi Mahadevi essentially means Queen of Earth. That was her name. And so Queen of Earth. Queen of Fire because, fire is usually associated with Rani Lakshmibai, the fire of courage, and then Jhansi burning, and so on and so forth. Queen of Water because the history of the Cholas is intimately linked to the Kaveri, so it's water.
exactly.
So I didn't go around hunting for elements, per se, but they just somehow magically associated themselves with my books. Yeah.
Okay. And I will come to my joint question that I have for you and for Shiny, which is how does the partnership work?
The partnership
How does the
between
partnership work? What is the dynamic like between you as the author and Shiny as your amazing publisher? And
oh,
I mean,
I was
five
just
out of the six books you mentioned are all edited and published by her.
it's
So,
not just 5 or 6 books. She actually started me off on my serious writing journey. So I think I've written about 12 books for her or so on. I've been writing, I've basically been following her around to every publisher that she starts working, every publishing house that she starts working with. And I would just say that my process, the partnership on my side is blind trust. If she tells me to change a line, I will change that line. I'm not going to at all, argue with her about it because I completely trust her, the way in which her eyes, the way in which she sees it, and every suggestion that she's ever made to me has always worked wonderfully. So I just do not question her, in anything. I don't know if Shiny's still there and wants to say something.
she's here. And
Okay, I'm gonna cry. Can you hear how choked I'm sounding? Well, it's really fun working with Devika. I mean, as I said, it involves chocolate and potatoes and lots of protests. But you also give her a really difficult idea, and she will protest a lot, but she actually loves it or hates it. I don't know which is the more powerful motive. But whatever you throw at her, she complains, whines, grumbles, and then goes away and does an amazing job. So it's really a privilege for me to work with her.
And likewise. So yeah, that's pretty much how the partnership is.
And I think I can speak for all of us academics who are working on the contemporary Indian kid lit scene. That's most of us at ACLiSA. That thank you for doing the work you both do because of you we have a job and we can do what we do.
No, thank you for this. This is so wonderful to be able to talk about my work and share my views with all of you. And yeah, are we out of time? We're out of time, I guess.
I think we're at the end of it, but there are a few compliments for you in the chat as well. I'll quickly read them out. Fernanda Vasquez Vela says, "Congratulations, Devika. I'm a research professor in Mexico and Argentina, and I'm always looking for materials to teach Indian history in a different way, especially by highlighting the role of women. I appreciate your work." Thank you for your comment, Fernanda. Urvashi Nangia says that thank you for writing these books in this session. Would love to read all 4 books in the Queen series. Please, we absolutely encourage you to read them. They're fantastic books. Should be mandatory reading actually for everyone. Anusha Srivastav says keep writing even without chocolates and potatoes.
Sorry, if I may just interject. I think the biggest, I mean, obviously working with Devika is a huge reward in itself, but the other great reward is watching Devika talking to a bunch of, pubescent schoolboys and lecturing them on the invisibilization of women. The look of utter incomprehension on their faces, and then there's this small woman lecturing them passionately. I mean, there are very few scenes in the world which are as funny. So along with knowledge and entertainment, Devika also brings a lot of joy.
And I think we're gonna have to end on that happy note.
Thank you for all the lovely comments, and thank you to everyone who's been watching this. Thank you, Ritvika. Thank you, the entire ACLiSA team, Anurima, Arpita, everyone. This has been such a joy. Thank you so much.
It's been amazing having you here with us today, starting off our year with you. And thank you to everyone who has attended this session, everyone who has left comments and questions in the chat. We are so glad you enjoyed it. And please keep an eye out for future events in ACLiSA for the next speaker series. We're not sure what that will be, but it will be sometime soon. So do keep an eye out for future speaker series events, other events that we do at ACLiSA. We're always up to something. So follow us on our socials. We are everywhere as ACLiSA. And we will see you again soon. And Devika, see you in person soon sometime, hopefully. Shiny, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.